I'd like you to imagine your dream life. See the version of you who has what you want to have, feels how you want to feel, and is who you want to be. I'm Brittany Hoops, your hypnotherapist and manifestation coach, and this is the show where I'll teach you to master the full power of your mind, to guide you on your journey towards destination manifestation.
Take a step back for the ones who can't.
Hello there, travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Destination Manifestation Podcast. How's it cooking, good looking? I don't know what possessed me to say that, but I hope you're enjoying your summer. I hope things are going well. I can't believe it's July now. I feel like right now I'm in this sort of quiet before the storm kind of moment. And only the storm I, will soon find myself in will be rainbows and glitter and sunshine and all my wildest dreams coming true, which I'm super excited about. But I'm getting more and more ready to welcome my long-awaited, beautiful manifestation of a daughter into the world in just like a couple weeks. Like at the time of this recording, it will be a month maximum until she is born. So, I can't comprehend it. Like, it's so amazing. I got this, she's the size of a Care Bear right now. And I got this full-blown baby in my body right now. And I feel her kick. And I love to see her on the ultrasounds. A couple ultrasounds ago, she was sucking on her toes during the appointment. Life right now just feels kind of so familiar, so normal. And yet I know so soon everything's going to change. And I'm ready for it. As much as like a person who hasn't been a parent before can say that they're ready without somebody rolling their eyes, like I'm excited for it. I know that even those things that I don't know that are going to come up, I'll be able to handle them, And so, I'll say that's kind of a hallmark feeling of being on the precipice of a manifestation, right? It's where you're ready, where you're open, where you're willing, where you're excited for change. But summer's here, and maybe you aren't feeling that way. It's okay if you're not. Maybe you're feeling a little behind. Maybe your dream life just kind of feels like a touch out of reach. And so I want to talk about the real reason today why that might be the case, okay? Because a brain, and your brain has a mindset, right, that wants to lock everything down, that wants to keep it all the same, that wants to keep reverting and repeating the past. We know that that's a brain that's operating out of a place of fear. And we're seeing a lot of that happening right now, if you happen to live in the country that I live in, which is the United States of America. And so in order to manifest an ideal life, it's kind of a given, right? Something's got to change. That's essentially a core component of manifestation. First, it's got to be the way that you see your life, the world, and the possibilities that are available to you. And then that change then becomes reflected in your physical 3D reality that you experience. That's essentially what manifestation is. But here's the thing that can really kind of begin to foul us up when your brain keeps sort of pulling you back into those same patterns and you feel sort of, caught in that quicksand of those patterns. And honestly, we look at that and we see that that's the opposite of change. You want to make that change. You want things to be different in your life. And yet, the moment you contemplate that, the brain's like, yank. Your brain just fights so hard to remind you of all the reasons why it won't work, why that's not meant for someone like you, why you should just give up, why you need to keep being the way that you've been. There can be so many things that, the brain gets really good at this and can be mighty convincing. Lord knows I have sat with enough clients in one-on-one sessions that just Their brains just want to fight and convince themselves and convince me, although I can never be convinced, that things can't change, right? And so if you've been caught in this loop of self-sabotage lately, of your brain just yanking you back every single time you try to take one of those steps forward, and now you're watching your goals begin to sort of slip out of your reach, which is the worst thing to watch ever, I want to talk about that because there's a lot of reasons why the brain is doing this because it wants to keep you safe. It's not looking to torment your life. It just wants to keep you safe. It knows that technically, on paper, if they hooked you up to a heart rate monitor, technically you're alive and breathing as you are, exactly as you are right now. The brain has kind of set the bar that low. That's the barometer. It's just keep her alive, And so you might not be happy, but your brain doesn't care about your happiness. It cares about your survival first and foremost. And it thinks, okay, well, she's alive in this state, so don't change. It's working, right? But you're ready to live, not just survive. You are ready to climb up higher on that traditional Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If you ever took a basic psychology 101 class in college, you probably learned about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Survival is the base, and you got to have that, and you got to have food, and you got to have water, and then you got to have a shelter, and it goes up and up and up and up from there. And self-realization and actualization's at the very top of the pyramid because that's kind of the bonus that you get once all the other survival mechanisms are met, right? And since you're breathing, you're a breathing being here right now, your brain doesn't want to risk you changing anything because change is kind of this big old question mark. Will you still will you still be safe if you make a change? And of course, we know better. We know that there's a way to not only stay safe physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but there's a way to thrive while doing so and to enjoy the human experience that goes along with that. We know there's more with that. And yes, it's going to require some changes, but those changes, once they're familiar to the brain, guess what? The brain actually will adopt them. It's crazy, Healing actually isn't that hard. It's just unfamiliar. And so if we make it familiar to the brain just gobbles it right up. Again, the brain only has one objective: to keep you safe. So if you can prove to it that this new state of being that you enjoy is equally or even more safe than the patterns that you've been stuck in before, the brain's going to be like, oh, yeah, sure, I'm on board. Let's do that. Great, right? It's just, you kind of have to prove your case before it will get on board. And I'm going to tell you and show you how to do that. But, it's kind of I don't know if you've been in, I know when I worked in a corporate job, you very rarely get the promotion before you've done the job for at least 6 months. And it's always so frustrating because you're like, oh my God, I'm doing more than I'm getting paid for. I'm not getting any recognition. And you're doing the job. You're proving you can do the job. And then all of a sudden, half a year later, your boss calls you into his office and is like, or her office, I'll say. And she's like, you've been doing such an awesome job. This position's now yours. And you're like, great. Nothing's really changed. I've already been doing it. The brain is like the boss here. She kind of needs for you to prove that it's safe before she'll get on board. So another kind of way that I like to think of the brain is it kind of reminds me a little bit of an overprotective parent, right? Which as someone who's about to enter into parenthood, right, motherhood so very soon, I can have a lot of empathy and understanding for why it might be very difficult, to not fall into that overprotective pattern, right? But the brain is like an overprotective parent. It's funny. I remember my dad, when I was growing up, he didn't want me to be an actress. And that was my dream, right? Because to him, acting was unsafe. Like there was no job security, there was no set salary. And like he was programmed to believe in like the corporate 9 to 5 sort of way of doing things. And so, although I will say he was very supportive of my acting as like a hobby and things like that, I remember being out to breakfast with him one day when I was like a senior in college and him just really suggesting that I study, broadcast journalism instead of theater, like like being a news anchor was like all I really wanted to do was see myself on TV. And that's why I was interested in it. And like that was going to satisfy my need to perform, which thank God I didn't do that. I couldn't imagine working in a field that had to deal with news all day long. But anyways, and, you know, well-meaning, I'm not sharing this to like shame him or anything, right? Well-meaning, but right, it comes back to safety. Same thing with my mom. I remember my mom saying, of course, she would love me unconditionally, no matter what, even if I were, lesbian. But I remember her saying that she wouldn't necessarily pick that life for me simply because she didn't want me to have to deal with that element of life that might be a quote unquote harder route. And I only mean that harder, and she only meant that harder as in like societal judgment or coming up against laws or, all these things, hate crimes, all these miserable, awful things that exist in the world by very ignorant people, right? But the message was this. It was a message that our brains send us all the time, right? Don't go after that harder, unknown thing. Stay here, stay safe, stay in the known. And again, I'm not sharing these details to shame them or any parents that want their child to have an easier route. I know I want the best for my baby, but like, we also have to recognize that there are so many aspects of life, the people, the situations, the societal expectations. There's all these things that seem to reinforce that you staying the same is the best option only because it's the more familiar option to those people and those situations, to them. But that doesn't have to be true for you. It doesn't have to be true for anyone. You can become familiar with anything you choose. And your mindset, like when your brain does that, like a loving but overprotective parent, it just pulls you back into repeating those past patterns again and again, even if they don't serve who you want to be. Now, even when you know better. Even when, and I'm sure there's a bunch of you right now that's thinking and listening and thinking like, okay, yeah, Brittany, I've been doing that, like guilty as charged, but I just can't seem to get myself to do something different. And I will say that can feel especially difficult, especially in cases where trauma may be running the show or running those patterns for you. But there is hope even in those cases too. And I want to talk about that. Okay. Let's talk about the neuroscience behind habitual emotional patterns. Okay. Now, I am a huge neuroscientific manifestation nerd. In fact, if you love to know how the brain works, just like me, I plug this series all the time because it's some of my favorite podcast episodes of the entire show. But I did a whole 4-part series on the show a couple months ago. It's called the Neuroscientific Manifestation Series. So go back to episodes 39 through 42. Check those out. But now let's dive into kind of a different aspect of neuroscience here today, okay? Our brains are amazing at creating and memorizing patterns. That's why it's so cute when we got these like little like kids, like 2 or 3-year-old kids that are like learning, maybe like 1.5, 2-year-olds. I don't know. I'll find out how old they are when they learn this. But like these little kids, right, that are learning their farm animals. And it's so cute when they think that every single 4-legged animal that they come across is a horsey, right? A zebra? That's just a black and white horsey. A dog? A small horsey, right? It's cute. It's funny because we can witness them as adults applying, and in this case, misapplying patterns, but they're learning patterns, right? And so our ability to create patterns is actually so beneficial to our daily lives. Like, I don't want to demonize patterns just because sometimes they don't serve us. Usually, it's a huge help. Like, it's great that our brains know how to do this. It saves us so much more time. It's so much more efficient. It's so helpful. Like, think of the fact that when you learn how to drive, you learn that a red light means stop and a green light means go, right? And the fact that you learn that pattern means that you don't have to learn it at every single intersection you ever encounter for the rest of your driving career, throughout the rest of your life. Like, that would make taking a trip to work or, God forbid, a road trip a very difficult and, exhausting and a time-intensive experience if you had to relearn that every single time. No, you learn it once, maybe twice. It's a pattern. Then you apply that same pattern again and again and again. Driving then becomes easier. It becomes automatic for you as you learn these patterns. But just like that toddler who's still learning to apply patterns, sometimes us, even as adults, we will misapply and extrapolate patterns incorrectly. This can still happen to us. I can't remember if I've shared this on the show before, but my favorite sort of real life example of some time that I did this was when I used to live in Los Angeles. I lived there for like 5 years. And we had an earthquake happen one night, which, I wouldn't say it's common, but it's expected if you live in LA, right? And it was one of the first earthquakes I've ever experienced. And so I sort of woke up in the middle of the night and I was startled and I was kind of like half asleep, right? Half asleep, half awake. I couldn't figure out why in the world I just woke up or what the hell was going on. And at the time in my bedroom, I had kind of this large dresser, this large armoire in my room. And the doors on it were opening and closing and opening and closing and opening and closing in response to the shaking of the earthquake. Well, my sleepy brain didn't go there. It didn't assume, oh, it must be an earthquake. My sleepy brain thought, the furniture in this room is possessed. There's a ghost. And so, the pattern it drew from was my past experience of watching like traditional scary ghost movies and, the way that furniture behaves like in Beauty and the Beast or something, as opposed to, real life. And so I think this was like my second earthquake, but the first one that happened in my bedroom or at night. Like I didn't have a very strong pattern built up of this. I never experienced and didn't have very many patterns to pull from here until, it took my conscious mind 5 seconds later, my conscious mind was able to wake up enough to realize, oh, actually, it's not just that piece of furniture that's shaking. It's the whole room. Oh, it just stopped. That must mean it was an earthquake. I looked online. Yes, there was an earthquake, right? And so it's just interesting that it might take you a minute to realize what's going on. So your brain, all of our brains do this. It can be doing this too, misapplying patterns. And so when it misapplies a pattern, especially one that you learn from childhood or patterns you learn from trauma or in a state of shock, a pattern that you learn pretty much at any point in the past, those patterns then begin to be applied or misapplied in this case, and they can shape your future. So this is why I like to tell my clients, like trauma is essentially just bad hypnosis that kind of got stuck on a loop. Isn't that nuts? Like, it's one of the reasons why I would say that hypnosis and hypnotherapy is so effective for people who have experienced trauma. Because when somebody comes to me and they say, I've experienced X, Y, and Z trauma, I already know that their brain responds well to patterns. And that's what we utilize in hypnosis too. Otherwise, if they didn't respond well to patterns, the trauma wouldn't exist. Their brain wouldn't have adopted it as a pattern, right? And so they would just kind of be this easygoing person who would who can sort of experience anything and nothing really sticks to them. And, we all know some people like that. They can go through, I think about like some of the people I like experience Big Brother with. Like, there was a lot of things about Big Brother that I would say were traumatic to me, but they just kind of like, they just sort of rolled off their shoulders. And I'm like, wow, like they would not be as great a candidates. I mean, they could still be hypnotized, but they wouldn't be as great a candidates as somebody who really assimilates in patterns, which unfortunately trauma is a way to assimilate a pattern. So if you've experienced trauma, and for me as a hypnotherapist, that's good for me to know, because then we know that your brain is really open to adopting patterns. And hypnotherapy can actually create the reverse effect. Your brain is already primed to adopt patterns, so it will be equally as primed to adopt a new pattern of your choosing. Yeah. And you may not have had the ability to choose that old loop, but the good news is that you can choose to rewire it. And that's the part that really matters. That's the part that puts you back into a control, right? And so honestly, I mean, when I'm thinking about this and when I start to get kind of too bummed out about the state of our world right now, I remember how our brains are designed. And the fact that our brains are what we would consider neuroplastic, meaning flexible. It's the idea of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change and create new patterns. And so if it were up to me, hypnotherapy might as well, if I were going to relabel it, and sometimes I do, but I call it neuroplastic training, because that's what it really is. I mean, if you're familiar, you're into manifestation, you've probably heard of the author, Dr. Joe Dispenza, right? He's very famous for saying, what fires together, wires together. And that's an easy way of remembering and explaining why we've developed patterns from our past, especially when we continue to repeat those patterns. But this is also a hopeful statement for our future. So your default response, it isn't your destiny. It's just something that's been repeated. It's simply a repetition that you've experienced. Because if we engage in this neuroplastic training, then that means that we can fire and wire new connections, new repetitions, connections that we actively get to choose this time. You might not have chosen it when you were a kid. You didn't really know you had a choice. You kind of just listened to your parents and whatever they say goes, and that's what you learned. But now you're an adult and you're like, oh, I get to choose. And so that repetition is the real rewiring component. So I want you to think of it this way. When you repeatedly experience the same emotional reaction, let's just say maybe it's like a fear of speaking up, or maybe shame, like you feel like a really deep sense of shame or guilt every time you try to take a break or rest. You feel like you always should be doing something, doing more. And maybe this is because, your dad yelled at you as a kid and you didn't feel safe to speak up and express your needs. Or maybe you had this really super toxic boss where you felt like if you even took just 1 second to scarf down lunch, you would lose your job. And so resting felt super unsafe to you. No matter where you originally learned the pattern, if you keep repeating that pattern, then what happens is the neurons in your brain involved in that emotional pattern, they start firing in a coordinated way. And just like anything you might repeat in life, you're going to get better and better at that. You're going to get more and more efficient at it the more you repeat it. It's basically like you're building the skill of this trauma. It's a skill you develop. And what happens is the brain strengthens those connections between those neurons. They fire and wire, which just makes that emotional response automatic and habitual to you. And so we know that the subconscious mind is the part of the mind that runs those automatic processes. It's why you don't have to think to beat your own heart, to breathe your own lungs, to carry out habits, reactions, automatic responses. That is the subconscious mind's job. And the misfiring of these patterns begin to happen when your brain starts to sort of extrapolate them onto situations where they don't actually apply. So, let's say this example. your father has passed away a decade ago, and yet you still can't get yourself to speak up as an adult, even though he is nowhere to be found. Okay. He's not yelling at you anymore unless you hear him in your head. You know, he's nowhere in sight. And yet those patterns that you learn from him continue to live on in you this time. And it feels dangerous to speak up, even when you're in perfectly safe environments with perfectly safe people. Your brain is now extrapolating and saying, this applies to all instances, not just those that I encountered as a kid. And again, it wants to keep you safe. So it makes this blanket statement because then if it's wrong, well, that's okay. At least you're safe. And so it creates this emotional cycle, right? It's your well-worn path in your brain that happens even before your conscious mind can even realize you're doing it. It's so automatic. And that's why things like willpower, let's say, like it just simply doesn't work. Willpower is a conscious mind thing. And you don't need more willpower in order to heal these patterns. What you need is to work with your subconscious mind rather than against it. Okay? So our job becomes, how do we interrupt this cycle, this pattern? How do we learn something new? Well, first of all, it starts with gaining some awareness around it, right? Something that happens automatic means that it can be a bit easier to keep doing it and never even really realize that it's causing you a problem or how to stop it. I mean, I'm sure we can all think of someone in our lives who has like a really negative habit and they have kind of like zero clue that they're creating their own suffering with it. You know, like they can't see it. And yet it's like so obvious to someone who spends a lot of time with them. What's the saying? You can't read the label from inside the bottle. That's what sometimes happens. You got to have that awareness. You got to be outside the bottle in order to read the label and know what it is. And so even if you were to sort of like lovingly point it out to them, like sometimes that pattern might be so automatic and so hidden to them in their subconscious minds that they might not even believe you. They might be like, well, I don't do that. And that's not the reason. Or they might get defensive or they might get mad at you, right? And then it's just kind of awkward because it's like they can't see it yet. And so we have to learn how to develop this awareness ourselves. We have to get outside the bottle to be able to see it. Now, hypnotherapy, this is where you connect. It's the technique and the method that you use to connect with your subconscious mind. That helps with this awareness process like immensely, okay? You can become aware of those mental blocks, those patterns that you didn't even realize were technically optional for you. And it's there that you can remove them, retrain them, reprogram them. Like I mentioned before, emotional and behavioral habits usually create an automatic loop, like a cycle, right? That we repeat. So here's kind of like how you would identify and become aware of that cycle, right? The cycle usually starts with some sort of cue, like there's an event or an internal trigger, right? Like maybe you hear someone speak to you in a critical tone of voice. And even though you left that old toxic job and that old toxic boss like years ago, something in the way that like your significant other just spoke to you, like just strikes a chord. Maybe not even like, it might not even be what they said. It might even that you just met someone who reminds you of someone you didn't like. And that could like trigger something in you. I remember that on Big Brother. It really worked to my detriment for sure. But I remember Turner told me that I just reminded him of this teacher he didn't like. And so like just my voice reminded him of that. And so it's like he heard my voice and it was automatic trigger of like dislike. Even though I'm not that teacher, I'm a completely different person. I might be everything he would enjoy in a person. I don't know. We're good friends now. But like, his brain wasn't letting him see that or see beyond that because of the trigger, right? So somebody might say something to you and their voice might strike a chord and an alarm within you now has been set off, right? And that alarm is like, wee-oo, wee-oo, wee-oo. And that emotion is just coursing through your body now. now that that alarm has been set off. And so that's the patterned emotional response. Maybe you feel anger. Maybe you feel like you need to withdraw, right? It's however you used to react back when you had that boss chastising you for taking that break. And then, and this might surprise you, first there's the cue, then there's the alarm, the emotional response that goes off. And then what happens in that cycle is that there's a reward. Bet you didn't think I was going to say that. I know it doesn't feel like a reward. Not at all. It feels like the opposite. But the reward in this case of acting out that repeated emotional pattern is the predictable outcome for the brain. So even though it feels awful to respond in this way, to feel this way, it feels right, meaning it feels familiar. You're used to it. The reward is that you don't have to do the hard, and I put that in quotes because it's actually not that hard when you work with your subconscious mind, but you don't have to do the hard things of responding differently. So maybe the reward is a feeling of safety and control. Even though it doesn't feel good, you at least know I'm controlling this. And so, yeah, now you and your partner, you're arguing, but at least you've done that before. There's not this big question mark anymore, right? But it's such a baseless short-term reward. It's like empty calories, right? It doesn't feel good. And you know that the long-term effects of living in this continuous loop, they are so detrimental to you, to your relationship, and just to your life. But what if you were a master technician, because you are, and you could rewire the alarm? You know, I have this powerful hypnotherapeutic exercise that I sometimes lead my clients through, especially when we're sort of looking to reprogram these cycles, right? And disidentify with them. But I'll have them in hypnosis, put themselves in their current situation. I want them to see their current selves, but I want them to see themselves in a hamster wheel of their own making. Yeah. And so they see themselves in the hamster wheel of the situation that they find themselves in of this pattern, of this trigger. And I just say, describe to me what that loop is like, what that pattern is like. Because in a state of hypnosis, the subconscious mind knows. Because the subconscious mind is the part of the mind that has been repeating that pattern. And so if you're a neuroscience nerd like me, the loop, where it's actually stored, is in the basal ganglia, okay, which is this deep group of brain structures that's involved with habit formation. It helps you repeat, like repetition-based learning, automatic motor actions, pattern recognition, emotional response loops, especially if they've been repeated over time, okay? And even though the subconscious mind isn't like this actual structure in the brain like the basal ganglia is, those functions that the BG does are technically subconscious functions, right? The BG helps to automate behaviors that don't require your conscious mind effort. So you don't have to think about the fact of how you can drive home from work. Like you've got that route so memorized. Your BG drives that for you, right? You don't choose to feel anxious in a triggering situation because your BG, I should say, has that loop already on speed dial. It's memorized. And so the BG, it operates. It's great for those things that we don't want to put a lot of effort into. It frees up a lot of mental energy for us in most instances, except when it's been conditioned to emotional responses that really don't serve you or your dreams. That's where it kind of fouls us up. And so it can make change feel really difficult if you're trying to make those changes consciously. Now, another area of the brain that plays a key role in this emotional memory is the amygdala. I'm sure you've heard of the amygdala before, especially in those situations where fear or like threat detection may be involved, trauma responses, anxiety, you name it, right? So if you've experienced a strong and traumatic emotions, the amygdala is going to start to extrapolate and say, oh, okay, anything that matches this or even just looks slightly similar to this, let's just throw it in the unsafe bucket, just to be sure. Let's just tag it as dangerous too, just to be sure, even if it isn't. I had a client when they first came to see me. She had PTSD. She had endured a tremendous amount of trauma, and she was triggered even by the color red. Okay. She would see a red Christmas wreath at a store, and that would just make her feel anxious because she had endured so much trauma as an EMT throughout her whole career. And so what's interesting here is she knows, and I know consciously, that the color red, there's nothing dangerous about that color. It is not inherently dangerous. Consciously, she knew that. We all know that. But the amygdala was going to town, and it was just labeling anything and everything that remotely related to those past experiences and just calling them dangerous, 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 and just sticking labels on everything, even if they weren't in real life. So this tagging process, labeling process, bucketing process, this happens faster than our rational conscious mind thought. And so that's one of the reasons why you can't think your way out of it. That means it's already happened before your prefrontal cortex, which is your reasoning brain, can step in and say, hey, come on now. That's silly. That's just a color. That's just a crayon in your toolbox, right? That doesn't apply here. Which is why it's not all that helpful for you to just be like rehashing your past all the time, again and again, consciously. And, I'm not knocking talk therapy. I think there's a lot of great applications for talk therapy. It can just be very nice to even just to talk to somebody from time to time. But sometimes when you get caught in this loop or you have a traditional talk therapist that doesn't understand how the brain works in this way, all of a sudden you're rehashing the past in ways that aren't helpful for you because the conscious mind doesn't need to rehash it. The conscious mind is the one that's late to the party. Your subconscious mind is where those changes need to be made. So here's kind of a recap of what happens here, and I'll give you an example to really solidify it. Let's say that you and your sister, you just fought like cats and dogs growing up. Okay. And throughout childhood, your relationship was not the best. And you've kind of made up somewhat as adults, but there's still just a lot of unhealed stuff there. Okay. So one day she sends you a text and you read that text. You interpret that text as being very judgmental of you and your choices, completely uncalled for text. You later find out that she was very stressed and she just wanted to, dump her stress on you, play hot potato with her stress. And that's why she sent that text, right? Well, there's a trigger that has then started to activate an old neural emotional pathway within you. That's the trigger. In this case, the trigger is the text. It pings that sort of raw nerve of all those times growing up where she would be judgmental towards you. And here it is, boom, 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 firing again, right? Well, that text set off the tripwire. That means the alarms are starting to go off in your mind and body. Wee-oo, 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 right? All those old familiar emotions start coming up. And those emotions fire off predictably. The trigger sets off the emotional alarm. Then the reaction becomes quite automatic. Our emotions fuel our actions. So you're feeling judged, you're feeling offended, and what happens? Ooh, you'll pick up your phone, your thumbs jump into action. You fire back the most loaded defensive text you've ever written, and your thumbs are just typing and typing away, and it's just all happening so automatically. And then you click send, right? And you hear the whoosh of that text just fire back to her. And then there's the reward in your brain. This is familiar. We know how this goes. It sucks. It feels awful. It's not who you want to be anymore. It's not the relationship you want with her anymore. But by golly, it feels familiar. And that's all that matters to your brain in that moment. You've completed that loop once again. And it's not your fault, technically. You've just been sort of punked by that well-worn neural loop again. And you know why this is a problem? Well, there's many reasons, but some of the reasons are, one, it's not who you want to be anymore, okay? You weren't in control of yourself, and that's not a good feeling. And two, you just strengthen that pattern. Okay. Not only is it not who you want to be, you just made it stronger to be the opposite of that. You just finished another loop, another cycle, another repetition. And so that pattern has now strengthened unless you do what needs to be done to interrupt it moving forward. But in this case, too late, right? Which is one of the reasons why maybe later that night or the next day, once your conscious mind can catch up, once you're out of that kind of like a heightened emotional state, you go back, you reread your text and you think, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that. That was a little harsh. Oops, right? And you have some regrets. This is because your prefrontal cortex finally showed up to the party, right? But it's late. It's later than your subconscious mind did. So this all makes a lot of sense, right? And I think by understanding what's happening in your brain, it becomes easier to offer more compassion to yourself for it. So if there's kind of one thing I want you to take away from this episode today, it's understanding what's happening and offering yourself compassion for it. You are not broken. This is just simply how human brains work. And your brain is doing its job. In fact, it's kind of doing its job almost a little too well. And this is why it can feel so frustrating because, the internet's telling you, like, just think positively, and you're like, I'm trying. But that conscious mind effort isn't healing. It's denial of these really real subconscious patterns and it's trying to sort of effort through them, which just doesn't really work. So we have to kind of learn how to hold two truths at the same time. Yes, offer yourself compassion and understanding. And also recognize that the compassion is not an excuse to allow this loop to continue, right? Because when you know better, you can do better. And just staying in that knowing space, it simply isn't enough. Because as we learn, the conscious mind can't reprogram this. You can't think your way out of this. It's the subconscious mind that needs to be employed here. And you need subconscious rewiring to create those new loops, to practice those new loops, and to make those new cycles that you have purposely designed and chosen to become your new safe, familiar, automatic cycles for you, right? So if you catch yourself looping, please don't shame it. Offer yourself compassion. Say, yep, I know what this is. Brittany told me all about this. This is just that old programming running again. It's an oldie. It's a Nick at Night rerun. Did you guys used to watch those? I don't even know if they're still on, those old episodes of I Dream of Jeannie or something. But once you realize it, then, and you've offered yourself compassion, zero shame, then it becomes your job to do something about it. Because the truth is you actually can. You can reprogram these things. So if this all hit home, if you have listened to this today and you thought, yeah, oh, that's what I've been doing. I just thought that it was me. I just thought I was an unmotivated person to get anything done. I just thought that was who I was. But now I'm realizing that's not me. That's not me at my core. I've just been stuck in a loop that happened so fast that I couldn't even realize it was firing and I was executing it until way afterwards. And that's not actually me. Me wants something different. Me wants to do things, productive things that I enjoy. That's the loop I want to create, or whatever habit or pattern or emotional behavioral response that supports your goals, right? So if you're kind of having that aha realization right now, and you're ready to finally rewire those loops, to disentangle those old ones, to create the new ones, I want you to know that I created something that's going to help you do that, okay? I created a free companion guide. And notice how I said it was free, okay? Because I want you to have it. And it kind of pairs really nicely along with this episode. And what it does, it's a 15-page guide. It's very in-depth. It walks you through those exact steps that I've used myself, that I guide my clients to use so that you can sort of stop those spiraling, looping thoughts and emotional reactions. And so I called the guide, it's called Why Nothing Worked for Her Emotional Triggers Until This Neuroscientific Method Changed Everything. Because we know that if you use the conscious mind, it isn't going to work. And it is chock full of examples, actionable steps you can take, you name it, that's going to help you reprogram these things. And so we talked a lot about the why today, but this guide goes even deeper into kind of more of the how, into the action steps you can take now that you are aware that this cycle is happening and how you can break it, how you can retrain it, how you can then create a new one. So now that you're no longer operating under those instructions that were given to you as a child or that you learned through trauma or wherever you picked up those darn loops, you are now the creator of a new loop now. So let's create a cycle that makes it automatic for your life to feel good. Wouldn't that be nice? We can do that. If the motivation, if the happiness, if the abundance, if the possibility, if all that, let's just assume that was all on autopilot for you. Would you enjoy it? I know I sure would. Cycles and loops, I don't want to demonize them. They're not all bad. They can be good. You just have to decide which ones you want to install. And it's your brain. You're now in charge of it, okay? Maybe when you were a kid, your parents were somewhat in charge and making sure you were alive. But you're an adult now. That brain is your job. And so I want to teach you how to install those new loops. So head on over. You can find that at BrittanyHoops.com/trigger or just the link in the show notes, right? And you can download this free 15-page guide. It is so chock full of things that you can start to implement literally today so that you can rewire your subconscious mind. You can regulate your nervous system. You can get those manifestations back on track. Because we know that those patterns, those old stuck patterns, they keep you from not changing, which means they keep you from not manifesting. And we don't want any of that here. Sound good? Amazing. Well, thank you, travelers, for joining us here today. I'm so excited for you to rewire those loops. And I'm going to catch you in the next episode.
I don't know.